These are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to part 3 of creating an active transportation plan webinar series. My name is Paula Hyman. I've been with you the last 2 days from the Ohio LTAP Center. Go ahead and locate that questions pod and put your hi, hello in there. Make sure it's still working for you today. And again, like last time, our presenter will address your questions from that questions pod directly. Attendance verification will be made for all 3 days, and you all will receive a email with access to the recordings for all 3 days, as well as any documents. And you'll get that from our LTAP Center following the presentation today. With that, I'm going to thank you for your participation and pass things off to Ms. Catherine Gervis, Senior Planner with Tool Design Group. Catherine?
And everyone, welcome to day 3 of creating an active transportation plan. My name is Catherine Gervis. I am a senior planner at Tool Design and have had the good fortune to work with folks like you from communities all over the state of Ohio. In fact, I've ridden bikes with elected officials, planners, engineers, public health professionals, and other community leaders thinking about active transportation in 65 distinct jurisdictions. I'm a year-round bike commuter. I started biking for transportation initially out of economic necessity. And though there's been a car in my household for the last 8 years, I continue to rely on a bike to get most places I need to go. This is what we've done in the last few days. And today we get to focus on implementation and tools and resources. So I'm very excited to bring that to us today. So let's start with responsible for which projects plan are and how you're going to one or two, hold on a second, legal authority and financial resources to build projects like city departments of public works, county engineers, Ohio Department of Transportation district offices. But those lead agencies must coordinate with and gain the support of many other organizations. Some of those organizations will have the responsibility to successfully implement parts of your plan. Some of those organizations will have the ability to influence how different constituencies feel about using active transportation. Some of those organizations will have a general interest in your efforts, whether that's because they're monitoring how public dollars are being spent or because you've successfully told the story of how their goals are tied to the success of people moving from one place to another by walking, biking, scooting, or using transit. Those organizations might include health departments, members of the business community, local advocacy groups, and even local media outlets. So even after a robust public engagement process during the development of your plan, it's really important to continue working with all of these groups and the public at large to let folks know what's happening when, and to continue gathering support and allow them to continue to play a role in guiding you during the implementation process. Whatever the size of your community, you are likely to have a variety of stakeholders you'll want to coordinate with on the implementation of your active transportation plan. Here's an example of stakeholders in a small city or a large city or a county-wide plan. So there, as you're important to prioritize engineering projects to make sure the order in which they are implemented accurately reflects local desires. So what is project prioritization? It's a process that identifies factors that are important to your community when selecting projects and uses those factors to score each recommendation. This table shows a standard prioritization process used for a recently completed Ohio Department of Transportation funded active transportation plan. In this example, the data for all the criteria is available through the census or through Ohio Department of Transportation sources like TIMS, which stands for Transportation Information Management System, and GCAT, which is the GIS Crash Analysis Tool. For those of you who are new to using those tools, I want to make a quick commercial for LTAP. They offer excellent trainings to help orient you to those tools. So when setting priorities, you take each segment of every route and score it using the criteria that you've decided on and assign it a rank. I do want to call out public input again as key to include in your scoring criteria. There is an expertise that comes with lived experience that stakeholders in your planning group probably won't have. To benefit from that expertise, you want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to rank projects themselves and that your methodology allows those rankings to be plugged into the data set used to create and set your final prioritization scores. Qualitative or subjective inputs like public feedback really complement the quantitative data and should be allowed to influence which projects are prioritized. Okay, this poster lists all the proposed projects for a Perry County active transportation plan, and it's broken down by road segment. The folks working on implementation brought it to their final advisory team meeting and to a few other locations that allowed the public to give feedback. Community members and the advisory team cast over 250 votes on the 37 route segments that comprise the countywide bicycle network. And the top 10 projects they prioritized are now shown here. Input in GeoProcess to make sure you have all the information you need to make good decisions. Online voting is another tool that can be used, though that may not reach the expertise you're trying to gather, as was discussed in yesterday's presentation. Thinking creatively and strategically around whose expertise is missing from your process is key to valuable public input. Following a methodology to create prioritization scores is very helpful. Once you have your prioritization scores, you can identify the top priority projects and start working on planning level cost estimates, conceptual renderings, and other details to ensure your community has detailed and actionable information you can use to implement your plan. So this is Perry County's projects for their first phase of the based on their prioritization results. Your short-term projects are those that are going to happen in the first 5 years, and the first phase is really important. Projects that are successfully completed early in the process, particularly those in highly visible areas and those that have the potential to serve many users, can generate real excitement around the plan and show the community's commitment to expanding active transportation as a valid means of travel. This means funding, community support, and political will to pursue the recommendations are most important during that first phase of implementation. Here is Perry County's second phase. These are the men at the 6 to 10 year mark. In this example, projects are completed during the medium phase of the plan would exceed. And here we have the third phase, last phase of implementation. Let's talk a bit well-connected and state-of-the-practice active transportation network. You can easily fail if you don't have good maintenance and operations protocol. It can become dangerous for people to use. You can create greater conflict between road users if things are not well maintained. A great bike lane that is full of glass is not going to be used by people who are experienced cyclists. They're going to move into the regular travel lane, which is going to really frustrate motorists who see a bike lane there. And inexperienced riders are going to travel in that bike lane, get a flat, have a bad experience, and think active transportation is not for them. So maintenance and operations is just really important to having a successful active transportation network. This plan is not just about capital expenditures. It's key to make sure that maintenance and operations is built into your plan. You're going to want to begin early. Creating a strong maintenance program begins in the design phase. Engineers and maintenance crews should be included in maintenance planning and in investment and budget decisions. Rely on your local experts like your maintenance staff. It will be very helpful and it will help you build to maintain facilities well. Your local maintenance staff can help identify typical maintenance issues like areas with poor drainage or frequent public complaints. They may have suggestions for design elements that can mitigate these issues. This can help you build your active transportation networks so that they are more easily maintained. For example, if you involve your maintenance staff in the design of facilities, they might point out that protected bike lanes should be made wide enough to accommodate existing snow clearing vehicles so that the city doesn't have to purchase a whole new fleet of plows just for its separated bike lanes. You're also going to want to remember equity. Consider the needs of under-resourced groups and the transportation disadvantaged populations in your communities during maintenance planning. For example, we all know that low-income folks don't use roads differently than middle-income folks, but research shows that pedestrian and bicycle facilities in low-income neighborhoods and in Black and Latino communities are in poorer condition than those in more affluent neighborhoods or predominantly white communities. In my personal travels around the state of Ohio, I can almost always tell where affordable housing is in a community simply based on the road surface. I don't think this is intentional, but I do think when we don't keep equity in the front of our mind, some communities are more likely to be under-resourced than others. The other advantage of keeping equity in the front of your mind when local governments prioritize historically underfunded communities by keeping their active transportation infrastructure in good shape, it serves not only those households, but also the business community, particularly businesses that we've come to know as essential workplaces where wages can be lower than other places and you may have more low-income households who need to access those business locations using active transportation. Remember, low-income households are less likely to have access to a reliable car for each adult member of the household and really need active transportation options to get to work, school, and various other places people need to travel to on a day-to-day basis. This is especially important during inclement weather. So in winter, when you're thinking about plowing snow, think about which neighborhoods, as you're prioritizing where you're plowing snow, think about which neighborhoods have a higher percentage of people who rely on walking, biking, and transit to get to work. The same person who relies on a bike lane to get to work in July still has to get to work in February. On the right side of this slide are a list of key topics related to maintenance and operations. We could actually spend a whole hour discussing the right side of this slide, but we're going to focus, just because of time, on 4 of my favorites. Okay, that is going to include snow and ice control. Oops, there we go. Pavement preservation, signs and marking, and policies and programs. So develop a sidewalk snow removal priority, an extreme hazard to all pedestrians as entire sidewalk networks themselves. Instead, we're seeing many communities turn to snow removal priority networks as a more feasible solution. Snow removal priority networks connect facilities that are critical to the community's walkability. So in Duluth, Minnesota, for example, they've identified 5 different types of priority routes comprising 100 miles of walkways that are cleared by the city and county following a snow event. In that community, they look at the safe routes to school routes, the high pedestrian traffic areas, the transit routes, and then the lower priorities are the medium pedestrian traffic areas and park priorities. The second thing I want to bring to your attention is the use of pre-treating or anti-icing treatments for priority bikeways. Pre-treating or anti-icing works faster and melts. Transportation report using 1/3 the amount of de-icing. This uses less salt and other de-icing. About snow and ice control, remember to design your facilities to accommodate your existing maintenance vehicles. This may mean designing something wider than you originally intended or budgeting the purchase of smaller scale maintenance. The area I want to talk about is pavement preservation. Protection and maintenance schedule is one of the most effective ways to shared use paths, sidewalks, and on-street bikeways. Regular and preventative maintenance can also extend the service life of a facility. ensure user safety, and reduce costly rehabilitation. The approach can be part of a pavement management system that evaluates active transportation infrastructure. Based on the score, recommended actions may range from no maintenance required to routine maintenance or even reconstruction. Another recommendation is to use city-hired sidewalk contractors as the default for sidewalk repairs. Sidewalk repair funding policies fall into three categories: either individual property owner funded, community funded repairs, or a hybrid of the two. This ad hoc approach can delay repairs and result in repairs of varying quality. A city-hired sidewalk contractor as the default for sidewalk repairs expedites the process and can create large cost savings for individual property owners compared to defaulting to property owner-hired contractors. This is because a city-hired contractor is able to give volume discounts through reduced mobilization and concrete delivery costs. Oops, we went backwards there. Pavement preservation. So signs. Repair or replace damaged or missing signs immediately. If a sign is damaged, there are a variety of reasons to replace that as soon as possible. Chronically damaged or missing signs degrade the user experience, make the facility more difficult to navigate for visitors and less enjoyable for all users, and they create vulnerabilities to your jurisdiction of a lawsuit if someone is injured or killed. So replacing damaged and missing signs is really important. Also perform routine inspection of pavement markings and replace as needed. Agencies might use a variety of different materials for marking bikeways, including paint, which could be water or oil-based, epoxy, thermoplastic, and preformed marking tape. More durable of these materials, like thermoplastic and preformed tape, should be used on priority bikeways and on facilities that share pavement or cross over heavy motor vehicle traffic. There are several factors that are going to determine which marking materials you are going to want to use: cost, durability, retroreflectivity, which is how well you can see at night, the friction coefficients, which is the slipperiness of the marking, and you're also likely to consider if the material can be applied using existing agency labor and equipment and remarking limitations and processes. Policies. So good policies around maintenance and operation is not a fantastic network. Policies are helpful in coordinating a consistent response particularly when different funding pots and similar responsibilities in your planning area. There are defining who actually has responsibility, particularly when you need to rely on people outside of governmental agencies like contractors on a construction site, where you want to make sure they're behaving responsibly with active transportation facilities. Good policies are also useful when setting expectations for the public so that they can be confident about what they're likely to encounter and who to go to if those expectations aren't met. Reasonable enforcement mechanisms need to be built into your policies so that you allow for operation-related issues to be addressed in a timely manner. Okay. Evaluating intended outcomes and contribute to a business being spent wisely. This table shows a few examples of performance measures, how they relate to plan goals, and what types of data are needed to measure them. Sometimes it's a simple matter of looking up census data. Other metrics require more data collection on your part and more investment. But remember, you're building a business case to your community for more and better active transportation infrastructure. When data is strongly linked to your actual goals, you'll be able to tell a more compelling story about why your community should invest in active transportation. Active transportation performance from into the tools and resources area. I want to remind folks that there is a worksheet you can download above the chat area in your toolbar. We'll also send this out to you with copies of the slides, as Paula mentioned. And I also want to remind people that these are being recorded and put into a YouTube link. So anything that you miss, you're going to be able to listen to all of this again. And here's your funding. Appropriate for a project, and depending on the source, may be leveraged against each other to expand the scope of the proposed project. ODOT takes the federal and state funds and allocates them into an Ohio Department of Transportation administered programs to help fund the state's multimodal transportation system and to address system needs. The primary funding programs that help to fund active transportation projects in Ohio are in the light blue in this graphic. Okay, I love this slide. This is a table that shows the variety of federal programs that and what type of infrastructure they fund along with eligibility requirements. If you are anything like me, it is hard to, it may be hard to remember what this next slide for you, which when you download that, it's helpful to use these two slides together so that you know what the various federal programs are. So let's talk for a second about some of the federal programs. The BUILD program, which is better utilizing investments to leverage development. There is a hot link in this slide to each of those programs so that you can look through those PDFs afterwards and see, use that in combination with the chart that I showed you a few minutes ago to see what might be most useful for your community. Now I want to go over a variety of state funds that help to fund active transportation. There are several programs through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, some through the Ohio Public Works Commission, and some through the Ohio Department of Transportation. And there are hot links in, again, all of these slides that will get you to those. There is the Recreational Trails Program provides up to a 20% match. It provides 75-25% match. Two programs provide funding for acquisition and development of trails and provide funding for maintenance. Another Ohio Department of Natural Resource program is NatureWorks. NatureWorks is allocated by the county and requires a 25% match. The dollars available vary annually for this. There's a 50% match. Programs focus on active recreation and would help. The land and water conservation funds are only available every other year. 2020 is one of the years those funds are available, and the deadline for this year for applications is November 16th. So you still have time to look at that program this year. These programs may fund portions of active transportation facilities, and certain conditions may apply. So refer to the latest request for proposal, the latest RFP to see what kind of match that is for what you're doing in your community. Another state funding source, Works Commission, and it will fund trails or sidewalks as standalone projects. If part of a larger water, sewer, or road project, sidewalks may be eligible. Green space funds may be used to acquire land before passive recreational development allowed. And there are both of those. When you get those slides, there are easy ways to check that out. The Ohio Department of Transportation has several funding opportunities. Transportation Alternatives has a 95% 5% split for construction and construction engineering only. The applicant must pay for design, environmental, and right-of-way acquisition from this pool of money. Safety funds may be eligible for up to 100%, depending on the type of countermeasure that you're suggesting. Safe routes to school dollars currently fund up to $400,000 and are currently available for 100% of your project. So any of these may fund portions of an active transportation facility. Again, certain conditions may apply. Refer to the latest request for proposal on these. Other funding sources to think about or administer the Transportation Quality Program, referred to as CMAQ. Metropolitan planning organizations and rural transportation planning organizations, additional funding grants on behalf of their members. Other local sources and regional sources can include street improvement levies or sales tax, but you're going to want to consult with legal counsel to determine the legality of using local taxes, levies, and bonds for active transportation. Metropolitan Planning Organization and large city programs. So Ohio Department of Transportation annually transportation block grant program funds to each metropolitan planning organization and large city. Metropolitan planning organizations also receive annual transportation alternative program budgets. Metropolitan planning organizations in U.S. Environmental Protection Agency designated air quality areas also receive congestion mitigation and air quality, those CMAQ dollars. CMAQ allocations for the 8 large metropolitan planning organizations are incorporated into a statewide allocation program. This next slide shows all of the metropolitan planning organizations, either an MPO. Other funding sources can include locations or national nonprofit interested in walkable communities. They have a big interest in aging in place. Rails to Trails Conservancy is another one. And then you've got local and county-wide foundations that may be able to assist with funding on active transportation projects. The big thing you're going to want to think about is how you tie your active transportation project into what that funder is interested in. So some common overlapping interests between active transportation plans and philanthropic funders might include organizations that care about environmental issues. Organizations that care about health issues. Certainly active transportation addresses both of those, and I think it's fairly well known that a case can be made there. But also consider organizations that are interested in economic development and business development. There's some pretty interesting research that shows that corridors that have bike lanes, for example, see increases in sales tax revenues within the small businesses in those corridors. So you may have to be more thoughtful about how you tell the story about how active transportation serves a business interest and economic development in your community, but there are resources to help you tell that story. Any organization that's interested in poverty alleviation may be able to be persuaded that active transportation can play a role in poverty alleviation. Certainly, we hear from folks who do this work that job training, for example, it's possible to help people who are trying to step out of generational poverty by training them for employment. And also there are entry-level employers who are looking for people, but transportation is often the missing link. Depending on the size of your community, active transportation is a real option if people feel safe and understand how to move from home to potential workplaces. 4 miles by bike is not a long distance and can be done fairly quickly. So helping to make the case that supporting active transportation will help in poverty alleviation can be a useful thing to do. Other areas to think about are safety. Certainly we have seen cases for increases in social cohesiveness in a community when active transportation is used. Oftentimes people walking or biking end up functioning as informal block watch groups in their community and just know each other better in communities and increase social cohesiveness. And we've even seen foundations interested in art fund things like bike racks, which can play both a role as public art and as a very utilitarian need. The Ohio Department of Health has also created an active transportation funding matrix for the state of Ohio. Lack of funding is a major obstacle for local communities seeking to implement active transportation strategies, and the Ohio Department of Health maintains this funding resource database for local governments and agencies seeking funding assistance. The database contains over 60 sources of federal, state, and regional funding, as well as private and nonprofit and other innovative funding resources. There is a link in this document to access this resource. You will need Microsoft Access to use this resource, but it is a resource available to you. And I really want to thank the Ohio Department of Health for their commitment to active transportation, understanding how that is an overlapping goal to their agenda. There are a whole bunch of other tools and resources available to you at a variety of points in this process, whether it's the implementation or the building of your active transportation plan. There are tools, organizations, one-stop shops. There are also some really good publications out there and some thought leaders in transportation who are really able to look at things through an equity lens and help you think about that. The Active Transportation Academy, which this session is a part of, it's a program that's offered to help communities reach their active transportation goals through educational opportunities and technical assistance. It's free to communities throughout Ohio, any local jurisdiction, and its partners, planners, engineers, parks, recreation and public health affiliates, decision makers, leaders. Right now, in-person instruction is not happening, but that will happen again, and e-learning courses are available. The Active Transportation Academy implement or bicycle and pedestrian related planning, a community to develop their active transportation plan or Vision Zero hours workshops. The e-learning offerings cover a range of topics like the crossing guard training, which is now available for e-learning. It covers similar information to the in-person instructor-led crossing guard training, but without workshops. So we have covered quite a bit in these last 3 days. We did an overview of, there we go, of the vision and goal for, I don't see that. Can you read that to me?
Sure will. Any evidence of crashes increasing, but it attributes to an increase in ridership. This was quite some time ago. This is at like 226. Can be difficult to measure relative to number of users. So let me send that to you again.
So I do want to talk about crashes in active transportation. That's a great question. There is some really interesting national research that shows when you improve conditions for people using active transportation, particularly people walking and biking and scooting, you actually see lower severity of crashes for all users. So let me say that again. When you make it easy for people to walk or bike in your communities, people in cars are safer. We see, and this was a longitudinal study done in 17 communities of various sizes around the United States that showed making things better for walkers and bikers in particular creates safer conditions for all users. Lower severity of crashes, lower fatalities and serious injuries. So great question. That is something that you're thinking about come up as you, they may or they may not.
We do have another question that came in. Said I was wondering about sealing of trails in rural communities. Will be set for something like that too.
Dollars are you using to fund it is one facility. You do want to think about, you certainly want to think about snow removal, but just maintenance in general, you're going to have to think about with your trails in any kind of community. Routes coming up through asphalt is going to be a problem regardless of the community, regardless of whether you're working with recreational or transportation users. So yeah, you're going to need a maintenance and operations plan, but the type of maintenance and operations plan for a trail is going to depend on what type of user is this facility designed for, who you're trying to accommodate, and who's using the facility. Great question.
There's nothing else in the chat, in the questions pod at this time.
Okay, so able to identify potential goals for your community, in your community related to active transportation. You understand how to identify the future transportation conditions that you expect for your community, that you're familiar with the types and designs of active transportation facilities. Any questions? Active transportation happening? Have a lovely day.
There are no questions at this time. Just so everyone knows, again, we will send out an email with access to the recordings from each day, as well as the copy of the presentation.